So, welcome all to the NAS Graduate Students Career Steps webinar series number 7. This is organized by the Graduate Student Committee. There's a quote attributed to Isaac Newton, where he says that if I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. So in these sessions, we're often privileged to host guests who have gone ahead of us as graduate students, who've completed their doctoral work, and we get to learn from them because they've seen farther, they've gone ahead of us. And so they have advice and insight that will benefit graduate students. We understand at NAST, especially the Graduate Student Committee, that navigating the transition from graduate studies to a fulfilling career can be overwhelming because there are countless possibilities. Some people might decide to join academia, industry, government, nonprofits, and beyond. Possibilities are limitless. But sometimes graduate students find themselves uncertain about which path to pursue or how to begin. So the Graduate Student Committee at NAST recognizes this challenge, and we're proud to offer these Career Steps webinar series sessions. These are engaging monthly webinar series designed to illuminate multiple paths and career trajectories. And here we offer practical guidance from folks like Dr. Weiland who've gone ahead. And then we also try to foster meaningful connection within the NAST community. These webinar series feature PhDs and seasoned NAST members who've already traversed the journey that some of our graduate students are beginning. And by sharing their personal stories, complete with challenges, pivotal moments, and unexpected opportunities, our speakers bring to life the myriad routes to career success. More than just providing inspiration, these sessions provide concrete strategies that have been tested. They provide resources and networks that we can leverage as a graduate student as you craft your own path. We know that after all, one meaningful connection sometimes can be that spark that redefines your career trajectory. So I'm just going to describe the how the session will run, and then I'll introduce. I'll open the floor and welcome Dr. Travis Weiland to take over. I've already talked about the Career Steps webinar series and the purpose to support graduate students. And so this is the structure of the session. We'll have 20 to 30 minutes where our guest will talk about their career journey and will present what they have for us today. And then they'll talk about key insights and decisions or even turning points. They'll provide practical advice and guidance to graduate students. And then after that, we'll have a time for question and answers where the participants will be able to ask questions. So you can type your question in the chat and I'll read that out, or you can unmute and then ask the question to Dr. Weiland yourself. So without any further ado, I'm going to open the floor and welcome Dr. Weiland. So take it away.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, thanks for having me here. I guess I'll talk through stuff for the sake of recording, but I will say, given how small our group is, feel free to drop questions in the chat at any time. I'll keep it monitored the whole time I'm talking. And I'm happy to kind of answer those as they come up. I'm going to go ahead and share screen, and I will share a link to the slides at the end too, so that you're welcome to post these slides if they're useful to folks at all.
Perfect.
Okay, so I didn't have a fancy title. I just went with what y'all call it. When to give a sense of kind of what I'll talk through. So I come from a background as a former classroom teacher, now consider myself an educational researcher, very much situate in academia. So a lot of what I'll talk to is that kind of career trajectory, is the kind of more traditional, I guess you could say. Academic career trajectory. I'll spend some time because this is kind of like this is meant to be a session about that transition period from grad school to the academic job market. And so I'll talk about the job search process because I've had more experience than a lot, which you'll see when you see my trajectory. And but I'm going to actually start kind of with my educational background and some of how that set me up for the trajectory. Because I find that sometimes helpful, especially thinking about as folks are grad students, what are opportunities that it's important to take advantage of, even in your first year in doctoral school, before you kind of to set you up well for the job market. And just kind of share some of the things that I've seen, insights I've had. I've also served on search committees, so I've kind of seen things from that end as well. Um, to give you a sense of my background with some of these things before we jump into it, so I've had tenure track positions at three different universities. My moves have always been for career reasons or personal reasons, well, political reasons usually, which I could describe as I kind of go through that. So I've been on the job search a number of times and made shifts kind of throughout. So I've gotten to experience different perspectives of it. My partner was in academia, so I've also experienced the fun joy of partner hiring, which is its own special challenge. I've also done job searches internationally. So my context is the United States currently, but I've done job searches in other predominantly English-speaking countries, and have some familiarity with what that looks like, at least from the applicant side. And I've kind of been on and off on job searches from 2016 to 2025, so a long career. I've also been an assistant professor for a long period of time because of those transitions. So I can talk a little bit about some of the things that, moving around has advantages for certain reasons, but it can also kind of delay, so to speak, your tenure timeline in various ways as you go through that process, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So where I'm at currently, I'm an assistant professor of mathematics education. But most of my research is around statistics and data science education. And so I move back and forth between a lot of different spaces, science education, math education, stats education, data science education. But I also tie very tightly to the discipline too. So I communicate and engage a lot with statisticians and data scientists, mathematicians, scientists that are in the field. Because a lot of what I try to do is take those disciplinary practices and think about how do I translate those into what we would want to see in kind of a K-12 school setting with a lot of work in the teacher education side of that. Um, in my current role, I teach a 2-2 load and I teach a mixture of content courses and methods courses. So whenever you're kind of a disciplinary background person, sometimes you live in a college of ed and you very much are like methods. Sometimes you're in a content department and it's very much content with some kind of connections to methods. And I've actually lived in both colleges of education and content departments, so I've kind of experienced both sides of that I can speak to as well, as we kind of go through. I also want to acknowledge that the job market changes. So my experience is really with tenure track positions. The other thing is, and I'm speaking from the US context, the higher ed landscape in the US right now is drastically different over the last year. We have very much made hard right turns to kind of a fascist state here. And so education gets assaulted pretty strongly in those kind of conditions, and we're experiencing that pretty heavily. Um, so when I talk about some of the things, I'm thinking about the US prior to this past year. And so I would say there have been shifts to some extent. I don't know that the hiring process per se has changed very much in that. Other than that, here very much like DEI is no longer a thing people are going to be asking about, probably, even though it's still widely accepted in certain settings. Though I have lived in Texas, and Texas is its own special creature. Um, so yeah, so just kind of keep that in mind. Uh, so I do a lot of stuff that's kind of justice or equity framed, and that started very early on in kind of my career, even though I didn't really acknowledge it until much later on. So my educational background, actually, I started at went to a secondary school that was a Catholic school, and you usually don't think of that as necessarily like a social justice hotbed. But it was run by Jesuits, and Jesuits are kind of an interesting uh, group within the Catholic Church. I'm not longer a practicing Catholic, but I learned a lot during that time period of a lot of the social justice movements that Jesuit priests were engaged in South America, and got to delve into a lot of kind of philosophical and ethical dilemmas during that time period that kind of set me up for some of the stuff that I do today. Um, I followed that up with going to a very unique undergraduate institution that's referred to as a work college. We only have, I think, two still operating in the United States. Um, if you've read John Dewey, it's very much like if John Dewey invented a college, this is what he would invent. So all students not only engage in classroom activities like you typically would at an undergrad institute, but we all work and we all do service. And so that kind of really developed my understanding of kind of Deweyan philosophy and what I do, but also Paulo Freire's work, and thinking about, what are our perspectives on education, on learning, what are our goals, things of that nature. I also had this kind of somewhat bipolar experience in education in that what I majored in was mathematics over here and then education over here, and there's really no connection made between the two, which science education can be very similar to that. When you're preparing to teach in secondary environments, you're very much expected to learn a lot of content and then some methods, and you may or may not learn a lot of methods for that content. So I went off from that experience wanting to be a classroom teacher. I taught in a high school setting for 5 years. It was a rural setting, but near a kind of a rapidly growing, gentrified area. And a lot of what I learned during that time period was just, the pragmatic realities of schooling in the United States. But that set me up a lot to then think about some of the philosophical things that I'd learned along with these on the ground kind of experiences with how does it play out in the classrooms. And that's what really sparked my interest in thinking about doing research. I never intended to be a researcher. I never wanted to do anything other than teach. But I started to really ask a lot of questions, which kind of led me to when I started to look more towards higher ed, which was through a master's program, actually. I came into my first kind of discipline educational researchers, so people that weren't just mathematicians or education folks, but people that studied education in disciplinary settings. And that's what kind of sparked me to go, oh, well, maybe this thing seems kind of cool. And at the time, I was starting to realize I had significant gaps in my content knowledge for what I was expected to teach, in particular around statistics. And I was thinking, well, if I'm having this issue, do other people have this issue? And so as I started to raise these questions, I was lucky to have professors that said, if those are the questions you want to answer, you need to go get a PhD. And so that's what I started to think about. So I actually taught in a number of higher ed settings first to get a feel for it. So I taught at a community college, a for-profit one. I kind of did the whole, I'm going to adjunct all over the place and teach way too much. And see what different settings were at the same time applying to PhD programs. In my PhD search, I was kind of regionally bound, so I didn't apply to a lot of schools. Luckily, I got accepted to both of them, and I ended up at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And there were a lot of advantage with that setting in hindsight, in that it was a mathematics education PhD program, but they had started it that way with the full intention of building it into a full STEM education program, which, from my understanding, I think is what it is at this point. So I was in classes with math ed and science ed faculty. And being stats ed, I kind of moved back and forth between the two because the mathematicians understood the educational setting where you're often teaching statistics, which is in a math course in K-12 settings, but the science educators far better understood like the statistical ideas of we're using inductive reasoning and context isn't everything and things like that. And during that time, I was lucky enough to be working on who started off as my advisor's career grant, and that afforded a lot of opportunities. So a little bit of what I want to expand on is kind of in that doctoral stage where a lot of you are. What are some things to think about or to try to take advantage of? Because a doctoral program yes, it's coursework, but the coursework is kind of just like a baseline. Um, it's different than, masters, you really just do the coursework and that's kind of like what you do. Undergrad can be fairly similar. A doctoral program is a lot more of what you make out of it. And so there's a lot of opportunities to kind of expand into things. So the opportunities that I had in being a research assistant were things like going to conferences. I didn't have to do that to graduate, but it was a huge asset to be able to go experience, what is it like at a professional conference? How do you engage in academic conversation? How do you network? Things like that. Attend a colloquium series. We brought in speakers to do talks. And back in those days, you physically brought them in, right? It wasn't that long ago, it was a decade ago, but we didn't do nearly as much virtual as we do today. I got opportunities to write journal manuscripts, conference proceedings, teach master's courses, all sorts of things like that. And I also had space to explore the ideas that I was interested in beyond what I was doing in the classroom. And so those are all really important opportunities for me to take advantage of that I didn't necessarily need to do for my coursework to get a PhD, but in hindsight ended up being super critical to helping me kind of uh, be successful in finding a job and also just kind of getting into academia and understanding what that was and being successful in it. The other thing that I noticed as a student, but even more so now as I teach doctoral students, is that coursework is sometimes viewed as just this thing you just get through. Um, and yes, some coursework is better than others. I truly acknowledge that. But there's a lot of opportunities in those courses to really develop aspects of what it is to be an academic. Part of that is exploring ideas to figure out which ones speak to you. Rarely do I find a doctoral student that comes in and knows exactly what they're going to do from the beginning. And part of that is just because you're going to read a lot of stuff. You're going to see new things. You're going to experience new perspectives. And that's really important to then start to figure out which of these speak to you. So I started off very interested in teacher knowledge, and now I still kind of dabble in that, but I don't really look at it from the same frameworks. I had no kind of intentions of doing justice-oriented work when I came in, and that's now very much what I focus on. And part of that is just because as I read different papers, theoretical perspectives, positions, philosophies, I started to find things that spoke to me better than others. And that's how I started to situate myself as a scholar. The other thing is that that's really your opportunity to read more than you'll ever get to read any other time in your career. When you graduate and you become a tenure track faculty member, reading is super crucial and you almost never have time to do it. I have to fight to find time to read. It's really hard. And so immersing yourself in readings and really engaging with those readings is really important, even if it isn't necessarily in your field. And part of what you learn from that too in those readings is you're learning what's the structure of an academic argument? What's the discourse that people use? How do you make these arguments? Because there's no cookbook for it. And part of it is just learning, different things require different arguments and different groups argue in different ways. And the only way you can really figure that out is to immerse yourself in it. And I say that in particular because as AI has become so prevalent everywhere and universities buy it for us for free now, we can use it for all sorts of things. A thing I'm noticing is more and more people are using AI for summary purposes, which don't get me wrong, absolutely. I mean, I do it for research too, but if you're always doing it, you're never having the opportunity to engage in a full article argument. And so you're not getting experiences to learn how would I even construct one myself. And that's going to be super crucial because A is not going to do that for you. And so there are, I guess that's my buyer beware sometimes with AI is that it is really good for things and you certainly don't ignore it and pay attention to it and figure out how to use it as a tool. Don't be like the Luddite that says no. But at the same time, be very thoughtful about what you're using it for and how often you're using it. But coursework can really be an advantageous place to start testing out your arguments because presumably if you have good faculty, good students, and the course is structured well, you're engaging in discourse and you're getting feedback from one another. And that peer feedback is going to make your arguments stronger. Um, the other side to it is research. If you're not on a research assistantship, this can be really hard, right? Because you're kind of doing it out of your own time. So how do you leverage your courses to be part of your research, perhaps? Or if you're a teaching assistant, how do you do that? If you're on a research project, I mean, yeah, you're supposed to work a set number of hours each week, but you can work more on it, right? Like if opportunities open up, grab those opportunities, take advantage of them because they don't always come up. And they can really lead to some powerful, useful experiences. And it's also an opportunity for you to start to develop your identity as a researcher. I have a very different researcher identity than what my advisor had. And that's not a bad thing. We're just different people. And so don't try to fit into whatever your advisors are doing necessarily. Look at lots of different uh, identity options, or however you want to frame it, and start to think about who do I want to be as a researcher because it's more than just a job. It becomes a lifestyle with the amount of work that you do with it. And starting to figure that out as a graduate student helps position you with that. The other thing is professional activity. So take advantage of going to conferences as much as you can. It isn't cheap. Totally understand that. If you can find grants to pay for it, if you can do local things, virtual opportunities, but that networking becomes super crucial. That's also lines on your CV. And so that stuff adds up that if you start doing it early on, you're going to be better positioned when you go on the job market. Webinars are great. Network and interact as much as possible. Engage with other people, whether it's virtually or in person. Look for professional development opportunities as well. These are all different kind of professional activities that don't necessarily check some box that you need to do for a degree, but starting to kind of position yourself in them and being able to talk about them. These are things that I have to do as a tenure track faculty member all the time. And so starting to get used to doing it early on positions you well. And there are service opportunities too, right? So most national organizations now have graduate student positions. A lot of committees have graduate student positions. Um, yes, they're work, but they're not usually a lot of work. Like the committees purposefully try to make it so that graduate students have voice, but we're not trying to dump a bunch of work on them in these committees. So these are opportunities to network with people that might be on hiring committees that you end up applying to, or might be able to connect you with things, or might become collaborators at some point because you find you have a common interest. Any opportunities you have to interact with other academics early on like that, outside of your own institution, are going to be super helpful in the long run. Um, and then you can also review for conferences. The people that are in charge of doing the reviewing process for these, they pay attention to the quality of these reviews. You're not going to hear about it, but down the line, I've had a number of times where people have commented, we really appreciate how much attention you spend on your reviews and like you do quality reviews, things like that. People start to recognize that you're a quality researcher through some of these activities. And so that's another opportunity to kind of develop um, your identity, but also kind of your what you want to call it, your reputation. That's the word I'm looking for in what you're doing. The other thing is to try to publish. The reality is that the job market is highly competitive these days for academic jobs that are tenure track. They are fewer and fewer, and there are more and more people applying for them. In the US, we also have added competition of the federal government decided to fire like, I don't know, 20% of its federal scientists. I forget the exact numbers. You can look them up, but it's pretty absurd. And so a lot of those folks are on the job market now, and they have a lot of experience doing things. Publications are part of what are going to separate you, especially for any kind of research institution that you're looking at. They're going to be looking for publications and grants. Grants are a little harder at your stage. You can apply for smaller things, but having ideas towards them. Um, my most cited paper that may forever be my most cited paper, I wrote that as a doctoral student. I started it in my coursework as an assignment, kept kind of dabbling with it, turned it into part of my theoretical framework for my dissertation, and had it submitted and was under review before I even started the job search. Didn't come out in print, so to speak, until after I'd gotten a job, so I don't know how much that led to my first job, but it's certainly positioned my career in the field. One of my first publications, in fact, was a practitioner paper. And so, as educational researchers, that's another thing to keep in mind is that there are different genres of papers, and some of them are quicker and easier to do than others, but still get your name out there and still start to show that you're familiar with the publication process. And so, don't forget those practitioner papers because especially if you're coming from a background as a teaching practitioner, you might have stuff that you didn't even think about that you can get out there fairly quickly and at least start that process of getting some peer-reviewed publications on your CV. The other thing is your dissertation, right? There's a couple ways I see doc students go wrong with dissertations. The most common one is they try to make it too good. You become a perfectionist and obsessed with this has got to be the perfect study, and it's not. Dissertation is part of the learning process. In fact, when I used to talk to folks that half of which are dead now, but are who did this way back when, most of them would talk about they never even published off their dissertations, never even thought to. Like that's just a you just do that to learn what you're supposed to do, and then you go actually do publications. Versus now, a three-article dissertation is a fairly common feature that you see, so that you can get things very quickly from dissertation to publication pipeline because the production is so kind of stressed, especially in research-intensive areas. And so being aware of that and thinking about some of those possibilities, like how do I turn what I'm doing in my dissertation into publications relatively quickly can really help you get your career off the ground. The other thing that I find people run into is being realistic. The most common thing I do with doctoral students is take an idea that's like this massive thing, and I usually tell them, I'm like, that's a fantastic idea if you have $3 million and a team of researchers, and you have none of those things. And so you got to zoom it in. Like, what's the little piece I'm going to do to start my journey that will then expand out into a large research trajectory in the future? So being very realistic about like what can I easily manage in a set time period. The more time you're spending on doing a dissertation, the less time you're publishing or going to conferences or just getting into a job that actually pays you money versus a doctoral student. You don't make a lot, right? And so just kind of be aware of that. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not the end game. It's what's getting you started. You want it to be good because that's going to help you get jobs. um, but it doesn't have to be the end all be all. The other thing that can stymie a lot of people is who they pick as their advisor and their committee members. At the end of the day, those are the people that pass you through the gates. Um, and some advisors are better than others, so to speak. Some of them expect perfect dissertations, and that's not the person you want as an advisor because that's the person that's going to gatekeep you from getting out there and doing your own work. That's going to be problematic. You want a cheerleader that's there to support you for that. You also want to pick a committee that gets along. Um, I've met doctoral students, and I've known personally ones that never got doctorates because they wanted the faculty member on there that was going to pick apart their dissertation the most to make it the best product. Well, they picked it apart so much they never actually got to create it. That became a hindrance to them getting out and graduating. So that's a real problem. The other problem that I see is that if the committee members don't get along, you might have two committee members that come from completely different philosophical backgrounds and they just fight each other over what direction you should go in because they don't agree on anything. That's also a problem. So you also want to make sure that your committee is there to support you and what you're doing in your idea. I purposely excluded somebody from my committee because after multiple conversations, I realized they didn't believe in the fundamental assumptions I was using, no matter how much research literature I cited to support my argument. And so that was not going to be a fruitful way for me to move forward. And so I didn't want them on my committee for that reason. And so just being very mindful about who you choose for your committee can be very helpful. So as you start to look to career trajectory, like I said, I'm most knowledgeable in the academic setting. I will say my wife was an academic. She moved nonprofit direction. I've had a number of colleagues that have moved to think tanks or to even for-profit companies. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you want to do, go seek out people that have taken that career trajectory and talk to them about it because they're different. It's a different kind of thing of what they're looking for. It's a different profile, and it's a different way you kind of make your case for what you're doing. So that's just something to be aware of. I'm going to speak to the academic route, but if you're interested in other routes, find folks that know that route and talk to them about it. It's really important. One of the ways you can start to do this too now, like even if you're in your first year, start to look at job postings. Like start looking at job postings for the jobs that you think you want. What are they looking for? What's in that posting? What are the preferred or required qualifications, spend time doing those things, making sure that you're going to check off those boxes as you move forward. Network, be realistic. So think about what are your constraints. Some people can't move, right? So that's a constraint. So what's around you? What could you do? What do you need to do to get those jobs? Family, partner, all those things. They all matter in how you're making decisions based on these things. And so just be realistic and forward thinking about that from the beginning, and you'll be much better off and then being realistic about what you're going to try to do. The other thing is, of course, talk to your advisor. They've been in the field, they have experiences. Don't just talk to them, talk to lots of people. That's why you want to network. But presumably, if you have a good advisor, they're going to help you kind of guide and navigate through that because there's a lot of unwritten norms in this process. When you go to do the actual job search, it is a marathon and it is not a fun one. I usually tell people expect to spend at least 10 hours on average per week just doing job search stuff. And that can be even heavier. I've lost entire weeks to the job search where it's a, maybe I'm going on campus interviews. Well, that's 2 full days just being on that campus, let alone the prep time I got to do to get ready to go out there. Sending out applications to a bunch of places takes time. You have to craft cover letters. You have to tweak your research trajectory, all those things. They all take time. And so just be aware and plan ahead for that so that it doesn't become the thing that you don't have time to apply for jobs and so you didn't get to. That becomes a problem for some folks. The other thing is it ebbs and flows. So like you'll go through periods where you're like, oh my God, I'm doing so much work right now, and then nothing, like silence for periods of time. So that can be super stressful for folks, but just kind of be aware of it, plan it ahead of time. Job postings come out at least a month before the things are due. Just keep track of it. Check every day, kind of at night, whatever, while you're watching TV. Mark the things down, start to do your documents, make sure you send them in. Just kind of keep track of these processes so that you don't get overwhelmed at any one given time with it. The other thing is that you're going to experience a ton of rejection, and it's usually silent rejection, um, because you're going to see anywhere from like 50 to 150 applicants for some of these jobs, right? And they don't really notify you if you didn't get it or not, oftentimes. Like it's just silence. And you can't take that personally. You have no idea who your competition was for some of these things. You have no idea what the specifics were that they were looking for, the politics on the ground there. So don't take it as a view that they don't think you're a good academic or whatever. You might just not have been the fit for what they were looking for. But that can be psychologically like really hard in the long term as you're getting a lot of rejection. And the silence part, you just don't know where you're at in the process, things like that. That can be very challenging to just not know where you are. To see kind of what the side looks like from kind of like a search perspective. So hiring committees, they go through this process, they collect all these applications, they sort through them, and then they try to narrow it down to like 10 to 20 people. So your job docs are really, really important because those are what get your foot in the door. If your job docs don't read well, you're not getting anywhere. And so that's why you want to start with those early. You want to get feedback on those and make sure they're good because that's the initial hook that they're going to have. Committee might have to sort through job docs for 100 some people, right? And these are tenure track faculty that have a ton of other stuff on their plate. They're moving fast. If you don't catch their attention quick, they're on to the next one. And so just kind of be aware of that. Like your cover letter, it shouldn't be an epitome. It should be page, page and a half, real quick, get to the point. Same with your research trajectory. If they're asking for a research trajectory or statement, same with your teaching statement. You want to really hit home very quickly what makes you special, and why they want to hire you for these things based on what they're looking for. You even explicitly state like, here's how I meet your required things or your preferred qualifications, things like that. Don't kind of like beat around the bush with stuff. Just get there quick and be very explicit. The other thing is, so that's round one, right? Then they do Zoom interviews. Used to be phone interviews. If any place offers you an actual telephone interview at this point, run away. That's a bad sign. You're usually going to do a virtual one. They're usually about 30 minutes. And that's how they're going to narrow it down from this 10 to 20 to three. Sometimes they'll bring out 4 or 5 if they have extra money or they, are thinking they might try to hire 2 positions, but The vast majority of the time, it's three. So they're really narrowing things down pretty quickly. The Zoom interview, if you get one of those, they're definitely interested in you. That's really meant to be a sorting characteristic of, can this person talk about this? Let's get a little more information about them, things of that nature. Make sure that you're ready for those. Like, come prepared with some questions, come prepared to answer questions about your documents that you sent in, who you are, and be prepared to get to the point very quickly with those, because 30 minutes isn't a lot of time. It'll go very quickly. And you really want to make as much of a good impression so that you stand out against all the other candidates that they're going to see. Then it comes down to the campus interview stage. That's where anybody that comes to the campus, they're willing to hire, right? They're really trying to determine which one is going to be the best fit. Part of that best fit is this a person we want to work with potentially for the next 30 to 40 years? So part of it is they want to see, like, how well do you fit in with the department? Are you a person that they want to spend time with to some extent? Do you seem competent? Are you going to do well with this job? It's also an opportunity for you to see, is this institution a place where I see myself being? It's, when you're coming straight from grad school for your first job, you're kind of just like, I just need a job to make some money, right? But you want to try to find a good fit, because in the long run, that could become problematic. There's different reasons why you pick your first institution. Sometimes it's a stepping stone to another one because that's the job you got to work your way towards the job you want. But just kind of keep that in mind. You want to be aware of those things because there can be some real red flags at places, and some of those can be really actually huge hindrances to your future job trajectory. Some of those red flags like over servicing, things of that nature to be aware of. The decision-making process varies drastically across institutions. Sometimes it's the committee makes a decision, sometimes it's a department chair, sometimes it's a dean, sometimes it's the whole department, sometimes it's a combination of those things. So also finding out like who makes the final decision when you come out to a campus interview, so you know who it is that you really need to impress upon, your value, or please hire me. That's an important process to know as well, and it can be very different based on the locations. When you go to apply, come up with an organization system. You're going to apply to most likely quite a few places. And so it can be, you can get lost in that. You got to collect reference letters for these things. They want different job documents. You got to personalize them in different ways. I usually use spreadsheets personally. I love spreadsheets though. So think about how you're going to organize to keep track of these things. Let your reference writers know well in advance that you're going to need reference letters so that they can start writing those for you. Academics are busy. So if you give them something the day before, you might not get that reference letter, or it might not be very good. So be prepared, get stuff ahead of time. Um, Make sure you get feedback on these documents, at least your initial forms. Like, you're going to have to tweak things along the way to really, specialize them for the calls that you apply to. But make sure that you're getting solid feedback on those. The first time I wrote all my statements, I gave them to my advisor, and she's like, "This is a good start. I would put these off to the side. Here's some suggestions and go write some new ones." And so I went back and basically rewrote them. Part of it was because I'd never seen these things. I don't know what they're supposed to look like. I don't know how to create my own identity through them. It's a very unique genre of writing to some extent, and we're not always good about writing about ourselves. So keep that in mind. Like, give yourself a lot of time for feedback. Um, Keep in mind that the initial waiting period can be long. So after you submit an application, it's usually going to be a month or two before they even do Zoom interviews, because it takes them a while to wade through all that. Sometimes they have to get approvals. So don't expect that you're going to get a response like the next day or anything. That's just not going to happen. It's going to take a little while. After you do a Zoom interview, it's usually a little faster because they've narrowed it down, but it still might take a couple weeks, and depending time of year, don't discount that. Once you've done a Zoom interview, though, you've likely got an email for the search chair, you've developed some kind of rapport. You can email them and ask them for updates, for those types of things, and they're usually very willing to give those. They might not normally just tell you though, otherwise. That's, again, everybody does it a little differently. Um, Anything after 3 months, though, you probably count yourself out, because that's usually way beyond the time that they try to move quicker on these things. Now, quick in academic time, of course. So, a little bit of my background. I did my first job search starting in 2016. I interviewed for 16 different institutions. I don't remember how many phone interviews I got. I think it was somewhere around 5 or 6, and only had one campus interview, and that only leveraged into one job offer, and I took it. And it was a great fit at the time. So keep in mind too that you're going to want to search for quite a few institutions because you don't know how they're going to turn out. So you really got to play the odds here a little bit. Um, where I ended up was great. It was a master's granting institution. I loved it at the time, but it didn't work out great in that I really wanted to do more research. And so over time, I was working a lot of extra hours to produce research to try to get to a stronger institution. Another thing, a factor was at the time, my partner was at a different institution, and we were sick of traveling 800 miles every time that we wanted to see each other. So it was a matter of also we needed to come to a common institution. And so that was another reason for kind of applying for a new position. Um, the first year I tried to do it, I applied to 16 different jobs, got 3 phone interviews, 2 campus interviews, and 0 job offers. And so even though I'd been in the field for a few years, it just hadn't really turned into the kind of products that were coming across in what we were doing. The second time I did it, I applied to 30 jobs. I got 7 interviews, 5 campus interviews, only one job offer, and it was not very good. I declined it. And my partner ended up getting an offer, and they were willing to negotiate in a partner hire. So that's how I got hired in, and that's how I ended up at Houston, was through that process. That was an R1. It was great. 2-2, College of Ed. Some problems though. All institutions have different problems. You got to find out, as one of my mentors told me, figure out the place that has the 5 things that are wrong that you're okay with living with. And that had things that were wrong that I was not okay with living with. And so eventually moved to where I'm at now, which is the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. It was an R2 and then turned into an R1 while I was here. It was an easy transition. Uh, when I went to apply again, at this point I had federal grants, including a career grant, and so it was a much easier time of getting job offers. Institutions are very keen on getting grant dollars, and so that makes it a much more attractive kind of hire. So you can see my odds went up quite a bit more that last time, and so I had kind of choices where I could go, so to speak, and chose to end up where I'm at. So those are things to think through, like where do you want to be? What do you want to do? And does that institution meet your needs? And you can see from my journey that that doesn't mean that you have to get your dream institution right off the bat. It might take time. There's a lot of prestige in this game too. So I got my degree from what's not considered the most prestigious institution. Prestigious is like Harvard, Yale, Michigan, like those types of places, right? Um, it's harder to go from an R2 to a job at an R1. And a lot of the research shows that as well. That's not just anecdotal. And so that's just something to consider too, is that it might be a little bit of a windy journey to end up where you want to be in the things that you're doing. But with that, I went way over my 20 to 30 minutes. So I want to stop talking and see what questions you all might have.
You've given us a lot of practical advice in that little time. I wish we had more time. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this. I'm going to open it up for questions for folks who are in here. Please shoot your questions to Dr. Weiland.
And feel free to, I'm monitoring the chat. So if you prefer to write in the chat or if you'd rather come off mute and speak your question, either way.
Cool.
Hi, Travis. Thank you so much for this information. This was amazing. It was like I'm walking with you on your journey of being a grad student to becoming a assistant professor at such a great university. And hi, basically, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Khushbu, and I'm a postdoc currently applying for positions. And there was this slide where you're talking about the research identity. So I wonder if, when talking about research identity and tailoring cover letters, how important it is to emphasize alignment with an institution's vision. Like, if I have a research identity which sometimes does not match or align with the institution's vision, so how does that tweaking, like, it's kind of a difficult how to tweak the letter. I wonder how much of this alignment is actually expected.
Yeah, that's a good question. So and there's different layers to it because when you think about institutional alignment, your university has some sort of mission and strategic plan, but then departments often do, and then sometimes you have like groups within the department, right? So like I'm a math educator in a math department. So we actually have
Mhm.
three groups that operate in our department. We have mathematicians, statisticians, and math educators, and they each kind of have a slightly different way of looking at things.
Mm.
So that makes it somewhat challenging. The number one thing that I would try to speak to first off is the job posting, because that job posting has been specifically crafted for what they want to hire. And that committee has got to use that document in making their determination. And so that would be the first thing I would try to align with. And a lot of them these days will talk about like, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is where we're
Mhm.
going, things
Mhm.
like that. So ways that you can kind of connect to that. Um, I would say like if there's a huge disconnect between those two things, it might not be the best institution for you. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. But there's only so much time you have in a cover letter, right? So I usually
Yeah.
look at what are the like the big things that they seem to be emphasizing, and how do I make sure that I really hit those things? And
Mhm.
that might the rest of them might be like a little sentence here or there, like I like to work with undergraduates, or or something like that, where you kind of connect to some of those other points because you're right, you don't have a lot of space for it, and you don't necessarily have to hit all aspects of the university's mission. The number one thing you want to hit is any required qualifications and the preferred qualifications that they've listed on
Mm.
there. Now, if they're like, you got to have a PhD, like, I mean, they
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
that without you writing it down.
Mhm.
The other stuff though, where they're they might be asking for a willingness to support diverse undergraduates. There's
Mhm.
ways that you can kind of weave that into your cover letter, or your teaching statement, and what you're doing. If they have particular research interests, they might state them. Like mathematicians, it's not uncommon for them to be like, we're searching for an assistant professor of mathematics with a specialization in topology, right? You see it in science departments too, right? Like we want
Yeah.
someone that
Yeah.
does biostatistics or chemistry or,
Mhm.
whatever,
Mhm.
botany. And so, if they have specific needs there to kind of tailor it to those, if that fits, who you are and what you're doing. I don't know if that answers your question or not, or if I just danced around it.
Yeah, it did because the reason that I asked this question is because the moment I look at the job posting and the time it takes to, view those ideas, because this is like time consuming thing. So I think, do I need to do that? Because I've clearly stated my ideas here in cover letter, what my identity as a researcher is, and it just that sometimes it doesn't match. That doesn't mean that I don't want that job. I want that job, but I'm forcing myself to tweak those ideas. So I struggle with those things sometimes. So like I was wondering, how do you deal with that? But this helps. This helps. Your answer really helped me to understand how I
Yeah,
can
it's a
navigate this.
balancing act. And the other
Yeah,
thing I
yeah.
would say is that, you submit multiple documents usually. Don't be
Hmm.
super repetitive across those. Try to use each of those to highlight different aspects of the calls. So like sometimes some of the research things I might not mention in my cover letter, but then my research statement, I make sure that they're addressed there very clearly. So that you can kind of use the documents and think of them as working together in cohesion versus each one is this independent thing. Because when we read those, we sit and read them together,
Yeah,
right? Like this
yeah.
is a person, here's their different statements.
Makes sense. Can I ask you another question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's this job posting which is only asking for a cover letter. So in this scenario, would you submit your teaching letter as well as research statement as an additional document, or just submit what is expected, like just submitting the cover letter?
So you can email them and ask them that question.
Okay.
Usually, though, my experience is if they don't ask for it, they're not going to look at it.
Okay.
Like you might go into the application system and they might have some feature where it's like additional documents that you can add on. Um,
Hmm.
But most times, and part of this is to kind of review people on fair ground. If they say we just want a cover letter, that's all they're going to be using for their comparative purposes, typically. But again, you can shoot them a quick email just to ask them for clarification. That should have like the search chair's contact information on there,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
search chairs are more than happy to answer those questions, right? Like they don't want to waste your time. They don't want their time wasted, so it's a lot easier to just ask a couple questions. So, like a common question I ask is that when I apply to a content department, I always ask them, my PhD is in mathematics education. Is a math department going to accept that or not? Because I don't want to waste your time. And they're usually honest. They'll say, no, we have math educators. We definitely value that. And others are like, yeah, no, that won't get you far here. And I was like, cool. Then I don't have to apply. Nobody's time is wasted, and you know where you stand with it then.
Makes sense. Thank you so much for answering that question.
Yeah, no problem. Crystal, I saw your question in there. Everybody deals with it in different ways. It's hard, especially if you get far in the search process and it falls apart on you. So finding ways of like, what's your stress reliever? Like for me, it's going on walks a lot of times. So like, just making sure I build some of that time in there. I think the other thing is just constantly acknowledging that it's not an indication of the quality of your work. You might have been competing against some stellar folks. So, for example, the position I'm in right now, hired in as an assistant professor. Well, I applied to this position with 7 years of experience and $1.5 million worth of grants. So, that's hard competition for somebody coming straight out of doc school. Now, when committees look at folks, now they keep this in mind, right? Like, yes, they wanted me because they had grant dollars, but I also fit the job well. I've also been on committees where we would choose a doc student over somebody with all that stuff because we look at it and we're like, listen, this person with all these grants is great, but they don't really fit what we need. They're not going to be a good fit here, and I don't know that they're going to stay here. So we might choose a doc student that's a better fit over that too. And you just don't know. And so that's why, it's one of those things of just, find ways to find some balance in your life during that time period. It is super stressful. Nobody likes the job search process. Like it's just you're right. You spend a ton of work doing it, and sometimes you get nothing but rejection for months on end, and that can be really really hard. Also, build a support network, like other people that are on the job search that you can kind of trade back and forth. The first time I went on the job search, somebody at another institution who had a similar research area as me was also doing it, and so we actually started sharing information. So we would share our lists of where we applied to, when the things are due, things like that. And then we would share with each other, like, hey, I just got a Zoom interview at such and such. So it sounds like they're sending out things now. So we'd actually give each other a little bit of heads up with that. And that was helpful because sometimes he'd get a Zoom interview somewhere where I didn't, but then I already knew, well, I got passed up because I know they already sent out the Zoom interviews. So I can put that aside and I can move on mentally to the next thing. And so that can be really helpful too. And it's just somebody that you can kind of share the stress of the process and kind of, vent to about some of these things. Advisors can serve in that role, but it depends. The other thing about advisors with the job search is that if your advisor has been in their position for a really long time, their job advice is going to be nah, because they came through in a very different job market. Now, if they're on searches a lot, they'll have some insights because they'll be on the back end of selecting people, right? So that can be really helpful. But if they haven't been on a search in a long time and they haven't been on the job search in a while, their advice might be not great because they're just not connected with what it's like out there right now. So that's something to be in mind too, is like talk to people that have been on the job hunt recently. How did they deal with it? But yeah, the frustration and sadness part is real. I'm not gonna lie. Like even when I kind of mentally prepare myself for it, it's still a letdown when there's a job that I really, really liked. And I just didn't get it. And that's just it's just the way it is. And just so, whatever your normal coping strategies are for the stress of academia, lean into those even heavier to some extent. And learning that balancing act is good now because when you get in the tenure track, you face rejection all the time too. It's just different, right? Grant proposals, which is even more work than applying for the job market. Publications, conference proposals. Like there's a lot of rejection in our field, and mental health is really bad in our field too. And so figuring out ways of like how do I deal with all that and how do I support my own mental health and what I'm doing is really really important. Yeah.
Do we have a time for one more question? Maybe from Khadija or Patrick? If you guys have questions.
Well, it's not really a question, but I'm just like wondering if if it's that challenging versus balancing the visa requirements if you're not from the country, then probably, and even in this environment, I don't know what to think about how those two will look like because you don't have the benefit of time. It's like finish and go.
Yeah.
And make peace with that.
No, that's an excellent point. If you're international, the US is probably not a great job market right now, to be honest. The new, like one of the things that we have instituted recently is H-1B visas, which is typically what we use for academics hired into positions. Um, they're now charging like $100,000, I think, for those. And so, like, I asked our provost recently because we have multiple job searches here. I'm like, if we choose a candidate from another country, is the university going to pay that visa cost? And she kind of used the evasive, well, if they're a postdoc, probably not. But I mean, if they're the right candidate, maybe. Kind of basically saying we're not going to come up with a policy on that, and we're just going to deal with it if we have to in the future. Some states like Texas, the governor is putting blocks on actually hiring international faculty right now. And so it varies drastically in the US what the cases will be for those. Some are still very happy to hire internationally and are willing to pay fees and stuff like that. It's just super volatile here right now. I will say there are plenty of other places to apply to, and maybe you do a postdoc for a year. Another strategy I've seen doc students use is if you have an assistantship where you're at and you're doing okay financially, maybe you just stay in doc school for one more year, right? You extend your dissertation writing period, you use it as some time to get out some more publications, you do the job market the next year around again too, and see if better offers or opportunities come out or the market stabilizes to some extent. It really just depends, I would say you know, the way that I usually balance it out when I'm applying to a place that I think of as a reach, so to speak, is how hard is it going to be for me to apply to this? If it's pretty similar to something I've already applied to, it's probably not that hard for me to tweak some documents, throw it out there, and do it. So usually if it's within like, well, this is going to be an hour or two for me to do this, but I don't know. I'll usually just go ahead and do it anyways because it's better to get more things out there than it is to say, well, I don't really know, and then not do it because then it's definitely not going to happen, right? So my usual tact is to say, if it's going to be a huge lift, like some universities ask for ridiculous things for applications, then I might say no. But if it's like, well, if I just sit down for an hour, I can make this happen. I would say still do it because you just don't know. You don't know how things are going to change in the coming months. You don't know what they're looking for, and at least it's an opportunity that way that you might not have had otherwise. And just again, look to where are other places I can apply. The visa process can be challenging though. Different countries have different processes, right? And how long it takes and how willing the university is to wait for that process to go through. They can vary drastically, but they'll usually give you pretty honest assessments of those things too to ask them about.
We are at the top of the hour, and I want to honor everyone's time. Thank you all for making time to join us, and thank you so much, Dr. Weiland, for, I can say this is the most practical advice that we can just go out there and start working with that we've received in these sessions. We really appreciate the guidance that you provided and making time for us today. And so, yeah, thank you so much.
And feel free, folks, if you want to email me questions too anytime, feel free to reach out. To the last question in the chat, where to search online search databases. I just Google for it. Like in the US, we use higher ed jobs as one of the big ones for higher ed. But also just, each country's got different search engines for them. But if you Google, you'll find them pretty quick. And ask your advisor. They'll know those things.